There are moments in life when power does not scream, does not threaten, does not lift a hand. It simply speaks softly, and the entire room understands that silence has become dangerous. Tonight we enter a world where respect is not requested. It is imposed by presence, where family is not decoration, it is destiny, and where a single gentle sentence from Don Vito Corleone could shake even the bravest rivals. This story begins with something deeply human and painfully universal, loss, and with something cruelly common, disrespect. A rival laughed at the memory of a dead relative. He believed humor could humiliate the Corleone name. What he did not understand is that in the world of Vito Corleone, the dead are never gone. They are honored, protected, remembered. And when someone mocks them, they are not insulting a ghost. They are declaring war on the living heart of the family. If you are watching from Mexico, Colombia, the United States, Argentina, Spain, or any Spanish-speaking country, you know what this means. You know what it means to defend family, to protect honor, to carry memory like a sacred weight. This is not just a mafia story. This is about dignity. It is about grief that does not weaken a man but shapes him. It is about the quiet gravity of a leader who understands strength does not always arrive with bullets. Sometimes it arrives with a calm voice, a measured gaze, and a sentence that freezes blood. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what power means to you. Is it fear or is it respect? Subscribe, leave your like, and be part of this story, because what comes next is not just cinema. It is reflection about how far a man will go to defend the people he loves without losing his soul in the darkness around him. Don Vito Corleone was never just a symbol of crime. He was a symbol of order in a chaotic world, of codes in a place where most men acted without conscience. People feared his influence, but those who understood him recognized something deeper. A man guided by loyalty, by gratitude, by duty. When tragedy touched his family, pain did not turn into desperation. It turned into clarity. So when that rival tried to turn death into a joke, he believed he was proving bravery. But true courage is not measured by how loudly a man laughs in the face of grief. True courage is measured by how silently another man reacts to it, and how the entire room feels smaller once he does. The night of the insult was not dramatic in the way outsiders expect. There were no immediate threats, no raised voices, no chaos. Instead, there was a table, wine glasses, laughter that did not belong there, and a slow quiet that spread when the joke finished echoing. Some men smiled nervously, unsure whether to pretend they had not heard it. Others lowered their eyes, suddenly aware that something sacred had been crossed. Then he lifted his gaze. Don Vito did not shout. He did not move abruptly. He simply looked at the man who dared to mock the dead and allowed silence to weigh on him like a mountain pressing down on his chest. In that silence lived history. The years of sacrifice, the price of loyalty, the funerals attended with dignity, the promises made to protect every member under his name. The rival expected fury. But fury is childish. Fury belongs to men who cannot control themselves. Vito Corleone had learned something far more powerful throughout his life. A whisper, when spoken by a man who commands the world, is more terrifying than a scream. And when he finally spoke, his words did not tremble. They did not stumble. They flowed slowly, softly, and with a respect that cut deeper than any insult ever could. He told the man that death is not a stage for humor. It is a territory of honor. He reminded him that grief is not weakness. It is the weight carried by the strong. And as he spoke, the rival's smile faded, not because he feared punishment, but because he realized something more frightening. He had revealed himself as a man without values in front of someone whose entire life was built on them. The room did not breathe. Even those untouched by the insult felt the cold edge of shame sliding under their skin. That is the power of Vito Corleone. He does not humiliate you with threats. He humiliates you with truth. And yet, what makes this moment unforgettable is not only the intimidation, it is the humanity behind it. Because behind that controlled voice existed pain, real pain. The pain of a man who had lost, who understood mourning as something sacred. He could have answered violence with violence, mockery with blood, but he chose something rarer, to defend dignity without losing his own, to show that power is not destroying the man in front of you. Power is making him understand exactly how small he is without touching him. But the night did not end there. Words may be soft, but their consequences are not. Respect had to be restored. Honor had to stand unbroken. And the world around Vito Corleone would soon learn that when he speaks softly, it is never because nothing will happen. It is because everything has already been decided inside him, quietly, completely, unchangeably. Because when Don Vito Corleone made a decision, the universe around him adjusted, like tides responding to the pull of the moon. After his soft words fell upon the room, nothing seemed loud anymore. The rival who tried to laugh at death now felt as if he had been placed under a cold light, exposed not as fearless, but as foolish. Men who moments earlier believed they were at a casual gathering now realized they had witnessed something sacred, a line drawn silently in the soul of a man they should never have underestimated. He did not ask for an apology. He did not demand repentance. He simply let the weight of honor speak for him. And that is when fear truly began. Because fear born from threats fades when the threat disappears, but the fear born from respect continues long after the moment passes. People left that evening with more than unease. They left with reflection. They had seen power that did not need violence to prove itself. They had seen control so absolute that even remorse felt small in front of it. Yet Vito Corleone was not done considering what had been broken. Honor was not a word he used casually. It was structure, architecture, foundation. To mock the dead meant to mock the living bond that held his world together. So while the rival walked away thinking the night had ended, Vito's mind continued working, not out of rage, but out of responsibility. How do you restore dignity without surrendering humanity? How do you remind a man of limits without becoming the very darkness you stand against? This is where the true brilliance of Don Vito reveals itself. He understood men. He understood pride, insecurity, bravado, fear, dressed as courage. He knew that the rival's laughter had not come from strength. It had come from fragility. Men unsure of themselves often mock what they cannot carry. And grief is too heavy for weak souls. Rather than punish him violently, Vito decided something more profound. He would teach him why certain things are sacred, not with blood, with consequence. Days passed, and rumors began spreading. People whispered about what had happened. Some admired the restraint. Others feared the silence more than any immediate reaction. In the world of power, delayed response is never a sign of forgetfulness. It is a sign of calculation. And nothing is more terrifying than a powerful man who is thinking quietly. Meanwhile, within the Corleone family, something else was happening. Those closest to Vito did not see anger consuming him. They saw contemplation, the weight of memory resting in his eyes. The relative who had passed was not just a name. They were part of the bloodline, part of the story, part of everything he had built. To protect the dignity of the dead was to protect the soul of the family, and this was not negotiable. When the rival finally received an invitation to meet Vito Corleone again, he knew it was not a casual gesture. Invitations from men like him are never casual. He arrived with tension in his chest, every step feeling like it echoed too loudly. The room was quiet, not hostile, just impossibly calm. The kind of calm that forces a man to listen to his own conscience. Vito did not greet him with hostility. He greeted him with civility. That was the first strike. Because civility from a powerful man you disrespected hurts more than punishment. It reminds you that you failed your own standards before failing his. He invited him to sit. He did not rush. He allowed silence to sculpt the moment again, shaping fear into humility. Then he spoke, not as a tyrant, not as a criminal, but as a man speaking from a place of loss and pride. He spoke of memory. He spoke of family. He spoke of the dignity every human being owes to the dead, not because of power, but because of humanity. The rival listened, shrinking inside his own skin, realizing this was not a confrontation. It was a lesson, and he was the student who had proven himself unworthy. There was no shouting, no threats, only truth, heavy and undeniable. And when Vito finished, he did something far more dangerous than punishment. He gave the man a chance to recognize the weight of his own disrespect and to decide what kind of man he wished to be after this moment. Mercy is frightening when it comes from someone who does not need to offer it. But mercy is not permission. Mercy is discipline with honor, because the world would soon understand that letting a man live with the memory of his own shame can sometimes be a far stronger consequence than any visible retaliation. And as this quiet storm continued unfolding, as respect began slowly restoring its place, something else unexpected started to happen around Vito Corleone. People began talking not just about fear, but admiration. Admiration not for power alone, but for the rare kind of strength that refuses to bend to humiliation and refuses to collapse into cruelty. Men who once saw Vito Corleone only as a strategic mind or a feared leader now began to recognize something deeper, something almost unsettling in its calm, moral authority. In a world where violence was often the first language spoken, his silence had become the loudest statement, and his controlled compassion began echoing in conversations across neighborhoods, across families, across the city itself. People began remembering moments when Vito had helped them quietly. A favor here, a protection there, a promise kept without publicity. They remembered funerals he attended not as a display of influence, but as gestures of genuine solidarity. They remembered how he treated grief not as weakness, but as a sacred human ground that deserved respect. The incident with the rival did not simply reaffirm his dominance. It clarified why he had it. Men do not follow him because they are afraid of dying. They follow him because they fear living in a world without someone like him holding things together with dignity when everything around threatens to fall apart. For the rival, admiration around Vito felt heavier than fear. He watched the perception around him change. People no longer saw him as bold. They saw him as careless, not brave but hollow, and that realization worked like a mirror he could not turn away from. The more the city whispered about Vito's restraint, the more the rival understood that his offense had not wounded a powerful man. It had exposed himself as a weaker one. Meanwhile, Vito Corleone continued life with his same composed rhythm. Business continued. Conversations continued. Family life continued. Yet beneath that calm, something essential was still unfolding. His decision had not been only about teaching a single man respect. It was about reinforcing the code that held his entire world together. Honor must remain unquestionable. Respect must remain unquestionable. Family must remain unquestionable. If one man breaks that and nothing corrects it, everyone begins to believe lines can be crossed. So the rival was not simply left with guilt. He was presented with responsibility. Responsibility to repair. Responsibility to prove that even men who fail can rise again by recognizing the weight of what they have broken. People close to Vito noticed subtle movements, words exchanged, doors opening for conversations not based on fear, but on consequence and understanding. If the rival truly wished to recover dignity, it would not be through hiding. It would be through confronting what he had done, facing not Vito's anger, but the reality of his own character. The rival struggled with that. Nights grew longer, silence became louder. The image of Vito's calm eyes the night he spoke lingered in his mind, not as a threat, but as judgment. It is terrifying when a man like Don Vito Corleone does not hate you, when instead he simply expects you to be better. Hate can be fought, but expectation demands transformation. Slowly the rival began to understand something he had never comprehended before. Power is not when others fear you. Power is when you make others examine themselves. Power is when your presence forces men to measure the size of their integrity. And Vito Corleone had done just that without lifting a hand. Around the Corleone family, loyalty deepened. They felt something almost sacred in watching their leader defend memory without staining it with unnecessary cruelty. Sons, allies, friends, everyone recognized that this was the difference between a simple leader and a patriarch. Anyone can command obedience. Few can demand respect in such a profound way that it reorganizes the emotional landscape of everyone who witnesses it. But admiration also brings pressure. Power like this attracts eyes. It shapes environment. And as respect around Vito grew, so did tension in other corners of the world he inhabited. Men who do not live by honor tremble when honor becomes powerful. Men who survive through chaos feel threatened when order proves stronger than brutality. And while the rival was transforming internally, others were watching, calculating what this moment meant for their own ambitions. Because when a man proves that calm can rule a room better than violence, those addicted to noise panic. And in the shadows, something was beginning to stir, not out of vengeance for the insult, not out of loyalty to the rival, but out of fear of what Vito Corleone represented if his influence continued expanding through dignity instead of terror. The city was quieter, but beneath that quiet, forces were shifting. Respect was aligning, loyalty was hardening, admiration was spreading. And far away from applause, far away from whispers, Don Vito Corleone prepared himself not for celebration, but for what always follows when a man proves he is stronger than everyone believed. For what follows is never applause, it is resistance. When dignity becomes powerful, men who rely on chaos begin to fear extinction. And slowly, quietly, some of those men started to move. They did not understand Vito's restraint as wisdom. They misunderstood it as vulnerability. They convinced themselves that a man who does not explode must be losing strength. They failed to understand that calm in a powerful man is not weakness, it is certainty. While admiration for Vito grew among families who valued loyalty, responsibility, and honor, another circle of men began whispering doubts. They questioned whether respect built from morality could control a world soaked in ambition. They wondered if softer words and measured actions would inspire obedience or inspire challenges. They convinced themselves that fear alone truly governs, and once men began believing that, they began plotting. These whispers did not disturb Vito immediately. His world had always been filled with men who misunderstood him. He had never been interested in proving strength through spectacle. His strength was structure. He believed that as long as honor remained the law, stability would follow. But dishonorable men hate rules they cannot control. And when they realized that the rival who once mocked death now carried humility instead of rebellion, when they saw shame transform him instead of destroying him, they panicked. Because if dignity can correct a man, then men like them have no excuse for who they choose to be. So they sought to provoke. Small acts at first, disrespect disguised as misunderstanding, broken agreements disguised as accidents, pressure applied in subtle places trying to force Vito into violence so that the balance would return to a language they understood. They wanted rage, not clarity. They wanted chaos, not order. They wanted the Don to abandon restraint so they could convince themselves that no leader could ever be more than force. Yet he did not react with the noise they expected. He watched. He measured. He listened to the shifting tones in conversation, the uneasy laughter in certain gatherings, the sudden nervous loyalty in others. He recognized this pattern. He had seen it before in earlier years when men mistook discipline for fragility. And as always, he did not lose patience. Patience is one of the most terrifying weapons a powerful man can possess. Meanwhile, the rival who once offended him experienced a transformation no one had predicted. The weight of his disrespect had turned into something close to purpose. The lesson had reshaped him. Instead of running from shame, he began to live with it honestly, learning the value of silence, responsibility, and reverence for what truly matters. He found himself defending the very values he once mocked, not to impress Vito, not out of fear, but because he finally understood the kind of man he wanted to be. This quiet redemption only intensified the unease of those who rejected honor. If a man once reckless could change, then their cruelty was no longer destiny, it was choice. And men who profit from darkness hate being reminded that they could choose light. Within the Corleone family, trust tightened even more. They saw danger rising not from a single insult anymore, but from an ideological challenge. This was no longer about one disrespectful moment. This was about a world deciding whether power would continue being defined by fear, or whether it would evolve into something far harder to control, respect, grounded in morality. And Vito understood the stakes. He knew this was no time for speeches, no time for dramatic confrontations. It was a time for resolve, for protection, for reinforcing every bond that mattered. He did not prepare soldiers, he prepared loyalty. He did not sharpen weapons, he sharpened commitment. Because he knew something the opposing side could never accept. Violence controls bodies, honor controls hearts, and hearts shape destiny. But as tension escalated, a new threat began emerging, not merely as a rumor, but as a force moving with intention. Men who feared the quiet strength of Vito Corleone began aligning, not around respect or brotherhood, but around desperation. They wanted to prove that kindness cannot survive in a ruthless world. They wanted to force chaos to reclaim dominance. They wanted to break the living symbol that Vito had become. The city sensed change again. Streets felt watchful. Conversations shortened. Loyalty grew louder. Suspicion grew darker. And in the middle of it all stood Don Vito Corleone, unshaken, carrying grief, carrying responsibility, carrying the invisible weight of every man who trusted him to keep order when temptation pulled the world toward madness. He did not fear what was coming. He feared only one thing, that the meaning of respect would be lost if he failed to stand firmly now. Because if honor falls, everything falls with it. And he understood that a moment was approaching when the world would once again witness the true power of a man who controls himself when others cannot. A moment when words would once again prove more dangerous than bullets. The men who had aligned against Vito finally felt ready to reveal themselves. They believed they had crafted a strategy strong enough to corner him, to force him into violence, to drag him down into the darkness they understood so well. They did not approach him with open hostility. They approached him with strategies that smelled of betrayal, wrapped in false agreements and fragile alliances. They hoped to fracture the quiet empire that dignity had built. But Don Vito Corleone was not surprised. Men who live without honor are predictable. Their ambition always outruns their wisdom. And so when they finally stood before him, convinced they controlled the moment, they did not realize they were standing inside a decision he had already made long before they gathered. He welcomed them with the same calm presence that had unsettled so many before them. No raised voice, no visible anger, only patience, which frightened them more than any weapon could have. He listened to their proposals, their veiled provocation, the subtle arrogance in their tone. He allowed them to expose themselves, allowed every word to betray exactly who they were. Then, when they finished speaking, the room grew quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like judgment, like the world pausing to listen. And when he finally spoke, he did not speak about power, territory, or retaliation. He spoke about responsibility. He spoke about what it means to lead men. He spoke about the cost of every decision, about lives shaped by choices reckless men make in search of validation. His voice was steady, almost gentle. But inside that gentleness lived something undeniable, truth. He told them they were mistaken, not because they challenged him, but because they misunderstood the foundation of strength. He made it clear that chaos is not courage, and brutality is not leadership. He reminded them that a world ruled only by fear eventually eats itself, leaving nothing but ruins where families once stood. And as he spoke, something remarkable happened. The confidence on their faces began to fade. They had come expecting war, but they had walked into a courtroom of conscience instead. Then came the decisive moment. Vito did not threaten to crush them. He did not list punishments. He simply removed their permission to influence the world he protected. Deals dissolved. Access vanished. Bridges they depended on were silently taken away, not through violence, but through the withdrawal of respect. In his world, isolation can be a harsher sentence than destruction. Men who once felt powerful suddenly found themselves small, not because they had been attacked, but because they had been measured and found empty. That is the terrifying brilliance of Don Vito Corleone. He does not destroy men to prove strength. He allows their own choices to collapse them. And as those men left, carrying the heavy realization that dignity had defeated them, the city felt the shift immediately. Fear loosened its grip. Respect tightened its hold. The idea that morality could rule without pretending to be weakness became undeniable. The rival who once mocked death witnessed all of this with quiet awe. He understood now completely why Vito inspired such loyalty. It was not because he was untouchable, but because he refused to abandon the principles that made him worthy of power in the first place. The rival finally carried peace instead of guilt, not because he had been forgiven with words, but because he had been invited to rebuild himself, and he had accepted the invitation. Around the Corleone family, life returned to its rhythm, but deeper, somehow steadier. Loss still lived in Vito's heart, but it did not harden him. It refined him. Every decision he had made since the insult proved one essential truth. Power becomes dangerous when it forgets humanity. But in his hands, power became protection. Leadership became guardianship. Influence became responsibility. And so the lesson remained carved not only in the lives of those men, but in the memory of everyone who had watched this story unfold. The rival who insulted the dead learned reverence. The men who tried to break dignity learned that honor, once truly embraced, is unbreakable. The city learned that the most frightening man is not the one who threatens, but the one who no longer needs to. In the end, Don Vito Corleone stood the same way he began, calm, unwavering, carrying grief with grace, carrying power with silence, proving that true strength is never the loudest presence in the room. It is the presence that changes the room simply by being there. He reminded the world of something timeless. Family is sacred, memory is sacred, respect is sacred, and the men who understand that shape the destiny of everyone around them. Because real power is not fear. Real power is character. Real legacy is not built from intimidation. It is built from the invisible weight of honor, carried with dignity, day after day, until even your softest words are enough to silence the world.